Good afternoon. Thank you so much for being here. This is Crossroads. Hopefully you are in the right place.
It's not the daycare center.
It is not the daycare center. But thanks for asking. Crossroads is a project of Interfaith Alliance of Iowa, and really at the core of what Crossroads is having civil dialogue on important issues that impact all of us in our communities. I'm Connie Ryan. I'm the Executive Director of Interfaith Alliance of Iowa, and I am delighted to have all of you in the room, online as well. Obviously, it's a big crowd here because everybody knows and loves Laura Belin. So, and always interested in what she has to say. And we're going to talk about, politics, right? Laura's favorite subject, my favorite subject, not really. And so I wrote this whole long introduction about Lori, but I feel like I'd rather give that time to her and to us because you all know Lori and you all know how fantastic she is and how dedicated she is to making sure that they need on politics. So, without further ado, I'm going to introduce Laura Belin. And also, she brought a tablet that if you are not on the email list for Bleeding Heartland, is there anybody who's not on the email list for Bleeding Heartland? But if you are not, I'm going to start this over there. If you're already getting Bleeding Heartland and seeing all of it, you don't need to add it, your name to the list. But it's just a way for her to throw that always thank you.
Yeah, it seems like it. So sign up is really helpful for me because before I start this, I would say something about Jewish. And nobody in this room knows this, but my brother Jim attended pre would not be made to feel less than. And I mentioned to my siblings that I was going to be here today, and my brother Tom said that actually in the late 1970s, he played in, there was some kind of an inter-congregational basketball league or something that he played in here as well. So I just want to say that this congregation has created so much good programming, not only for its members, but for the community at large. I'm really grateful that they've allowed the Interfaith Alliance of Iowa to use this space. And so I think we should give a hand to them. I want to talk a little bit about the legislative session, which is starting on January 12th. And then I'm going to spend a little bit of time on the 2026 elections. And then I want to leave plenty of time for questions because I know in a group like this, people will have so many good questions. The big issue that the Republican-controlled legislature needs to deal with this year is property taxes. I don't think they can go home empty-handed. They've been promising for so long now to do something about property taxes, but I honestly don't know whether they can figure this out. This is normally in an election year, the legislature tries to wrap up pretty early and get out of town. I think especially they're going to want to do that this coming year because there will be quite a few competitive Republican primaries. And they can't take campaign contributions while the legislature's in session. So it's a real incentive for them to get out of town. But I mean, this property tax thing, it's not easy, right? If it were easy to figure out, they would have done it already. And Bobby Kaufman, who was the main House Republican working on this issue last session, is now the House Majority Leader. So there's a new chair of the House Ways and Means Committee who's, pretty inexperienced, Carter North. And I just feel like this is, I don't know. I mean, I feel like they can't leave without doing something on property taxes, but then I just think, what are they gonna be able to do on that? So that is something that I'm gonna be watching. The relationship between the House and Senate Republicans, I don't know how widely known this is. They really don't get along very well. I mean, it's surprising, and as much damage as I think the trifecta has done, I think they would have done more damage if they were on the same page more often. But every year, the House and Senate Republicans kill quite a few of each other's bills. And now there's a new Senate Republican leader, Mike Plimish, and so I'm kind of interested to see whether that changes the dynamic and whether there's more productive working together. The Senate Republicans, as using the pandemic as a pretext, but about 5 years ago, they stopped participating in the joint budget subcommittees that had been going for decades and decades. And it further, made the legislature dysfunctional and made it more difficult to get a budget agreement. And that was why this year, I mean, they didn't even agree on the large spending targets until after the date that they should have already been adjourned, gone home. So that's something that I'll be watching. A bigger picture question is, are the House and Senate Republicans going to have their act together? There's a lot of drama right now in the Senate GOP caucus. We have a Democratic senator here who can speak more to that. But for most of the time I've been following the legislature, the Iowa House Republicans have been a little bit more fractious. And then the Senate Republicans have been more like fall in line and do what the leader says. But the script flipped this year, and I couldn't believe it, but a dozen or so Republican senators really held together and forced a vote on an eminent domain bill that the leadership didn't want, which I'd never seen anything like that, and actually got that bill to the governor's desk, and of course the governor vetoed it. So now eminent domain is this hugely divisive issue in Republican circles that they're going to need to deal with. And I think there are still some hard feelings among the Senate Republicans. I saw this week that Mike Plimish, the new Senate Majority Leader, he has this idea of a property rights bill that he thinks they're going to move early. So I think his goal is to kind of get this issue off the table early, but I'm not sure that his idea of just widening the corridor that a pipeline can go, I don't know. I certainly don't think that would satisfy the House Republicans. And I'm not even sure that it would satisfy everyone in his own caucus. So the eminent domain and land use is going to be another really interesting issue. The legislation that I expect, of course, the state budget is going to soon be in total collapse. They can keep it papered over for now because they have accumulated surpluses and reserve funds from when the federal government was just shoveling money at all the states during the pandemic. And John Mueller, who used to work for the Legislative Services Agency and was actually in the 1990s a revenue estimator for a while, he wrote a great piece for Bleeding Heartland, which is on the front page right now, about the fiscal mismanagement that we've seen. And he lays out the numbers and charts a lot better than I could. But the gist is that we're going to be out of money very soon as a state. And for now, they have the surpluses to cover. But just in the current budget year, we're going to be spending probably about 1.3 billion more than the revenue that we take in. And next year, it's probably still going to be more than $1 billion. And even with the optimistic scenarios, we're going to be out of money by, at the latest, I think, 2029 or 2030. I actually think it'll happen sooner than that. The more specific bills that I think people in this crowd will be concerned about, I do expect more efforts to limit abortion medication. I don't think that they probably have the votes to do like a total personhood ban type bill, but I think they'll be chipping away at abortion access any way they could. And probably, it seems to me that the family leader and the groups that work on this issue, that their top priority is going to be the abortion medication. I expect more anti-vaccine bills because of the federal government leading the way and making anti-vaccine sentiment. I mean, it's already pretty powerful in the Republican Party, and it just seems like every year there's more and more. This year, there were a couple of really bad vaccine bills that got subcommittee meetings. They didn't get beyond the committee stage, but I just feel like every year we're going to see more and more of that. I do expect more attacks on libraries. They've had the last couple of years, there have been multiple bills to try to either eliminate the obscenity exemption for libraries, try to take away their funding if they're members of the American Library Association or other things of that nature. They might even bring back the idea of giving city councils the ability to overrule the library boards. And I've noticed that every time there's a bad library bill, the subcommittees are just packed with people. And I think that that's going to be important to have people back. I'm going to stop. I'll take any questions later about the legislature, but those are kind of the big areas that I'm going to be watching. I want to talk about the elections because 2026 is quite honestly, I think, going to be the most interesting election cycle in Iowa that I've ever covered. You probably already know this is the first time since 1968, so that would be before I was born, that we have an open Senate race and an open race for governor in the same year. We also have 2 of the 4 congressional districts are open because Randy Feenstra is running for governor in the 4th, and in the 2nd district, Ashley Hinson is running for Senate. We have competitive Democratic primaries in all of the 4 districts. We have competitive Republican primaries in 3 of the 4 districts. Marietta Miller Meeks, I think it has like a non-zero chance of actually losing that primary. Even with Donald Trump's endorsement, she is something else, man. I don't know how you could be in politics as long as Marietta Miller Meeks and still have issues with where do you even live. I mean, that is just wild to me. But she, and in the 2024 cycle, I was watching it a little bit, but I wasn't really closely following her primary because her primary challenger, David Couch, who's a real MAGA Republican election denier guy, he raised and spent very little money. I think he spent less than $40,000. And then he got 44%. I guess she beat him in the primary 56-44 after she spent hundreds of thousands of dollars, and outside groups aligned with House leaders spent hundreds of thousands of dollars. And she still didn't even crack 60% in her own primary. So I'm watching that race very much. I do think, of course, everyone knows the 1st and the 3rd congressional districts are among the top targeted races in the whole country. But the 2nd congressional district, frankly, I think is in play right now. I mean, Trump won the 1st district, that's Southeast Iowa. He won that by about 8.5 points. And he won the 2nd district, which is mostly Northeast Iowa, by about 10 points. So it's certainly Republican leaning. But as an open seat with no incumbent, looks like Republicans are possibly going to nominate Joe Mitchell. He's never lived in Northeast Iowa before September of this year. He's not even 30 years old. He's never held a job for any significant length of time. He's got big support. He's a big talker, and he's got big support from major donors. But I don't know. I feel like maybe Iowans don't care about being a carpetbagger. I have no idea. But I feel like that 2nd district, if it's a good year for Democrats, that is definitely a race to watch, that I would watch. And the 4th district, there's like a wild 4-way primary right now, but it seems like the front runner is probably Chris McGowan of the Siouxland Chamber of Commerce up there. Of course, it's a heavily Republican district. The statewide, or the Senate race, I should talk about first. We're going to go down the ballot, the federal races. I should have started with the Senate because that's at the top of the ballot. So Ashley Hinson, she is going to face at least one a competitor in the Republican primary, but pretty hard for me to see Jim Carlin beating her in the primary. But I do think he ran against Chuck Grassley in 2022, and he got about 1/4 of the vote against Chuck Grassley. And I think he can do better than that against Ashley Hinson. And I also think he can just create some problems for her by highlighting some of the issues that she probably doesn't want to talk about. The pipeline, property rights, election denialism, that, she's kind of complicit in a lot of what Trump does, but not necessarily loud and proud, whereas Jim Carlin is loud and proud. The Democratic side, we have a 3-way Democratic primary. Josh Turek, Zach Walls, and Nathan Sage. I think it is going to be, a really interesting primary. And I believe that competitive primaries are actually good for Democrats. Somewhere along the way, Iowa Democrats got really afraid of having primaries. And I absolutely disagree with the people who pressure candidates to drop out or whatever, or try to put their thumb on the scale in a primary. Because I think it's better. I think like Cindy Axney became a better candidate through the process of her primary in 2018. And I think that that's going to be the case for whoever is the nominee for Senate. The governor's race. Man, I have never seen anything like the Republican primary for governor right now. I mean, Randy Feenstra, I think, is the worst candidate I've ever seen who's a front runner for a major office in Iowa. I mean, for Kelly, and again, like the summer and fall. Okay, so he comes out in the spring, right away, his exploratory committee is running a bunch of TV ads. So he's clearly running for governor. And then he's just, where was he all summer? They had like 6 weeks off in July, late July, August, September. He was just nowhere doing it. He was not at any public events that I could see. Then they had 40 some days off during the shutdown. And again, it's like the guy was like in the witness protection program or something. And he's doing events now. And who follows Randy Feenstra's social media or Facebook page? He does he's doing these events that they seem to be mostly like invitation only, or you have to register in advance at pizza ranches mostly. And they're in really small setup rooms. Like they're in rooms for 20 or 25 people. And I have literally seen more people at the Windsor Heights and Clive Democrats monthly meeting than at the Randy Feenstra, the Republican frontrunners events. He is not showing up at the multi-candidate forums. And even last week, this was my favorite because there was a candidate forum in Sioux Center and he lives in Sioux County and he had his own event, a private event in Sioux County, in Sioux Center. And it was like, we packed the room. And if you look at it, I mean, there were maybe 20, 25 people there. And then he skipped the candidate forum in his own county. And it's just, I don't know what he thinks he's doing, but you do need to be out there and practicing. And Rob Sand, Julie Stouch is also running in the Democratic primary, but clearly Rob Sand is heavily favored to win the nomination. But who's been to a Rob Sand town hall or a public event? And so a lot of people. And I've been to quite a few. I went to some in the past years when he was doing them with the state auditor's office, and I went to a few this year with the campaign. When you do 100 events like that a year, you get pretty good at giving your spiel and answering the questions and fielding the questions. And you can kind of gauge how the audience is reacting to things. And Randy Feenstra, he hasn't done that. And he isn't doing that because as far as I can tell, he's doing these events for 15, 18, 20 people who already support him. So he's not getting the practice and he's not getting the feedback to even try to understand what is working and not working for him. And I still think the Republicans are favored in all the statewide races because I've written pretty extensively about the voter registration issue, the turnout advantage the Republicans have for midterms. But it's like, Randy Feenstra is really testing my determination to see the Republicans as favored in the governor's race because he is just not doing what he needs to do. Now, he doesn't have a guaranteed lock on the nomination because there are 4 other Republican candidates. But of course, it's a lot better to be 1 against 4 than 1 against 1. And the other 4 candidates, you have Eddie Andrews and Brad Sherman, so I think they're going to struggle to really raise the money to run a statewide campaign. And then you have Zach Lund, who most people have never heard of, and Adam Steen, who most people have never heard of. And I think both of them are going to have some amount of money and support. But it's difficult when you've got Randy Feenstra already has a lot of the establishment. He's got a lot of the big ag interest. He's raising a lot of money, and yet he's such a bad candidate. So it's going to be a really fun, interesting race to watch, that governor's race. And I think that all of the other statewide offices really are going to be influenced a lot by how the governor's race goes. Bryce and I were talking about the ticket splitting. There's less ticket splitting than there used to be in Iowa. And I believe that a lot of the ticket splitting in the past wasn't so much like people thinking about ticket splitting. It was just more like people voting for incumbents. So we happen to have incumbents of both parties. And so I think it's the Democrats running for all the other statewide offices are really going to need the governor's race to go well. But keep an eye on the attorney general's race, because Brenna Bird is not setting herself up very well. And I had to laugh yesterday. I've been thinking all year, like, thought experiment. Is there anything Donald Trump could do that Brenna Bird could publicly be uncomfortable enough to express some kind of public discomfort with? And it happened this week. Did anybody hear about this? Can anybody guess? I'm just going to tell you because you won't guess. Yesterday, no, she didn't say anything about the Rob Reiner post. I don't think so. At least not that I saw, I don't think she's ever denounced anything. She's in there in court, defending every Trump policy. Well, yesterday, Donald Trump signed executive order number, 200 and whatever, ordering the Justice Department to reschedule marijuana from Schedule 1 to Schedule 3. And I saw the Iowa Attorney General's office did not put out a statement on it, but Iowa Capital Dispatch pointed out in their coverage, and you should be reading Iowa Capital Dispatch if you're not, by the way, that the Indiana Attorney General issued a statement that was signed by like 7 Republicans, including Iowa's, expressing concerns about rescheduling marijuana. So I thought, Brenda Bird, that's probably like the only popular thing that Trump has done lately. And that would be the one thing where she would distance herself from the president on that. So, Brenda Bird, I think is genuinely vulnerable in the attorney general's race. And if you have a chance to hear Dane Willem speak, I think it's really worth doing. So the state legislative races, I don't want to talk that specifically about them, but Iowa, thanks to not having gerrymandering, we have so many competitive state legislative races, and there are going to be a lot, especially in Polk County and around Polk County, a lot of really good races to watch this year. And so if anyone ever asks me, like, where should they put their volunteer time in? You really can't do better than volunteering on a state legislative race, I think, because you can have a really big impact. And I think that the state legislative races, I think, can almost be helpful to the candidates up ballot. Of course, it's always good for the lower down candidates when the top of the ticket does well. But I believe, for instance, that Cindy Axne was greatly helped by what was going on in West Des Moines and Ankeny and in some of the activism in some of the state legislative races. And I think that we could see that again. So I want to leave lots of time for questions. And where's Connie? Connie's going to be going around with a microphone. So we need to not shout out the questions, but wait for Connie to come to you so that then also the people online can hear.
I'm going to ask you one other thing as well. I would like you not to stand up and promote your candidate.
Yeah.
Okay? We are a C3, 501c3 nonprofit organization, and everything that Lori has said is fair game, and you can have opinions about things. But please don't stand up and say, vote for this person or vote for that person. I would love you if you stick with that.
Okay.
I actually had 2 issues. One, we lost 2 soldiers, and how well were they trained to do what they were sent to do? And then the other is, what are the possibilities of our governor doing any commutations before she takes off?
Those are really good questions. First of all, I have to be honest, I did not even know that we had Iowa National Guard in Syria right now. I knew that there was a large group that deployed to the Middle East. So several people have asked me, why are the National Guard doing counterterrorism? I think their mission was something created. It's something related to counterterrorism, and were they trained? I just can't answer that question. I do not know what kind of training they had, but people have asked me, why isn't the regular military doing that, and why is the National Guard? I just don't know the answer. Commutations, I'm trying to remember, I feel like around a year ago, Cedar Rapids Gazette did an article that Governor Reynolds has done very, very few pardons and commutations, and Governor Branstad did very few. So I don't know. I don't necessarily expect a lot, although sometimes, if it's going to happen at all, it would happen in the last year of somebody's term. But that's not something that I really expect to see a lot of.
Hi, I live in Ames, and I'm wondering to what extent, if any, there might be a hope for a Democratic candidate. I'm not supporting anyone. And so, no, because I'm told not to. What's your sense of the fourth district and whether or not a Democrat might have a chance? I've been here since 1984. It's been a while.
Yeah. The fourth district is really, really tough. It is, so it's about, like, one way of looking at congressional districts that is called the Cook Political Voting Index, which shows how the people in that district voted for president compared to how the whole United States voted for president. And I think it gives people a really good idea, right? So the third district in Iowa is, you know, just more like an R+3, like people voted a little bit more Republican here. Whereas the fourth district is like an R+16, or it might be R+15 now, but it's in that range. So it's very challenging. And I know that J.D. Schulten, when he was running in 2018 against Steve King, he came very close to beating Steve King. He only lost by about 3 or 3.5 points. But Steve King had some unique vulnerabilities that probably the nominee in the fourth district is not going to have. But that's not to say that it's not important to have Democrats running a strong candidate in the fourth district, because I think it's really important. And last week there was an Iowa House special election in House District 7, which is Sac, Pocahontas, Calhoun counties, and a little bit of Webster County outside Fort Dodge. And the Democratic candidate, Rachel Burns, she worked really hard. She had a lot of volunteer support. She's running again next year. This is not a district that any Democrat could realistically win, even in like a 1974 landslide scenario. However, it's helpful. If you don't have a candidate that's out there working, it looks like Democrats don't even care enough to offer people an alternative. And so I think it is valuable and important. And I was glad to see that there are 3 Democrats running. Dave Drawson, Stephanie Snyder, and Ashley Wolf Turnevane are all running in the fourth district. And as far as I can tell, they've all been pretty active out there going to events in different counties. And I think that's really important, because we can't, I mean, Ames, Story County does have a Democratic organization, but some of the counties in the fourth district, you know, they just haven't had a lot of candidates being active. And it is going to be important for all of the races, including the statewide races, that there are Democrats out there everywhere. Lori?
Yeah, thank you for this presentation. I was wondering if you'd like to say a little bit more about the third congressional district race, Democratic primary, for example, and also I'm curious about that treasurer, auditor, secretary of agriculture races, anything to say about those?
Yeah, we don't, right now, there are no declared Democratic candidates for state auditor or state treasurer. I'm sure that there will be one, but right now, there's not much of a race. There is a competitive Republican primary for state auditor, but I think that Chris Knoyer, who's the lieutenant governor, is pretty heavily favored there. The secretary of agriculture, I know Chris Jones, who is a former University of Iowa researcher, writes a lot about ag and water quality. He's seriously considering it. Haven't made a final decision yet. Secretary of State Ryan Peterman is the only Democratic candidate that I know of. The third congressional district, I'll say this: if the election were today, Zach Brown would lose, I believe, to any candidate. I am not personally endorsing in any primaries. We actually have one of the candidates here, Xavier Kerrigan, is over here. I think that Zach Nunn is in a world of hurt right now for a few reasons. First of all, Donald Trump only carried this district by about 4-point margin. And Zach Nunn also won his race by about 4 points. So that, which is to say, he did not outperform the top of the ticket. So he's not like an electoral juggernaut who's going to do better than other Republicans on the ballot. And he's kind of in the healthcare situation. I think it's difficult for all of the Republicans, and I think in different ways, Mariannette Miller Meeks and Zach Nunn have kind of created different problems for themselves on this issue. But we're going to have tens of thousands of people are going to lose their insurance probably in the new year. I mean, they're just going to be priced out of having a policy, or the ones who do still have a policy are going to be going from paying a few $100s to sometimes thousands of dollars a month. So that's going to be a lot of people, including a lot of self-employed people. That's not going to be good for Zach Nunn. And relatively recently, he changed his position on that issue to say that he was supportive of extending the health care, the extended tax subsidies for the Affordable Care Act policies. But he didn't really do anything, like he didn't sign a discharge petition. And I don't think that he ever really thought he would have to vote on it. But now, this week, several of his Republican colleagues signed on from other states, signed on to the discharge petition for the Democratic bill, which is just a clean extension, 3-year extension of those Affordable Care Act subsidies. So now, Zach Nunn, I mean, he's been saying that he wants them extended. So now if he votes against extending them, that's bad. But if he votes, he's been sort of saying he wants to make some changes, but extend them temporarily. Well, now the bill he's going to have to vote up or down on is just a clean 3-year extension. So if he votes for it, the conservatives are going to go bananas because he just voted for Obamacare, right? So, and how worried is Zach Nunn? Well, Zach Nunn and Mariannette Miller Meeks about a week ago voted for a collective bargaining bill that I didn't even realize that they were, I don't even know that anyone in labor was lobbying them to vote for that bill. I don't know of them casting any pro-labor votes, which you would know better. And does he have, I mean, so that was bizarre. Only 20 House Republicans voted for this bill that would roll back some of the president's executive orders about collective bargaining for federal employees. It's not going to go anywhere in the Senate, so it's not going to become law. But the fact that Zach Nunn voted for that tells me he's really, really worried. So a lot can change between now and November, but I definitely think the 3rd district is going to be one of the most likely to flip in the whole country.
Hi, so I'm Marshall James. I'm here with Public School Strong, and I'm curious about what you've been hearing around public education in Iowa. What sort of priorities in this second half of the biennial around public education, the private school vouchers, and what you see as for public education and the vouchers as a critical issue in this year's elections.
Well, I think it is going to be a critical issue because it's first of all, it's a big part of the state budget problem that we have, because we're going to be spending probably $350 million this year on school vouchers, and it's only going to escalate every year. And many private schools are expanding their facilities. New private schools are being created. So this thing is soon going to be a 400 million plus line item. I don't know what the Republican bill, I mean, they've done so much already attacking public schools that I'm not sure what the new bills are going to be this year. I think there's going to be a lot of focus on higher education. I see that particularly from the House Republicans, that that they have this separate now higher education committee. And I think there's going to be more meddling with the Board of Regents, more meddling with the state universities. So I kind of expect a lot of activity there. But I don't know, Senator Purbuck might know about what they have brewing for the K through 12, because I feel like they've already done so much. There's not a lot left, and yet there are always more every year. So I think that the budget is just going to continue to be a problem, because when you have public school funding increasing every year by less than the rate of inflation and less than their costs are going up, it's just forcing cuts year after year. And I like to say, I mean, I live in the West Des Moines district, but my kids grew up and went through the Des Moines public schools. The voucher program is bad for every school district. It's certainly going to be bad for the Des Moines public schools. That's why they're going to have to close some buildings and make a lot of changes to deal with declining enrollment. But the Des Moines public schools are not going to cease to exist. Okay, I mean, that the West Des Moines public schools are going to have some issues to deal with, that they're not going to cease to exist. But we are not many years away, I believe, from some of the smaller school districts in Iowa just not being able to manage, because losing even 15 or 20 or 25 kids, they can't sustain that. They can't hire. It doesn't cost you any less to run the bus for fewer kids or heat the building for fewer kids. And these schools like Pella Christian is expanding, and they're busing kids in, not just from Pella, but they're busing kids in from Knoxville and Oskaloosa, and I think as far as Newton. And so it's affecting enrollment at all of these area schools. And so I think a lot of the Republicans who voted for the voucher bill, and they thought, well, we don't really have any private schools in my district, so it's not going to affect my schools. I think that was a huge miscalculation, because there are more private schools being created, and there are going to be more and more incentives for people to pull their kids out of public schools, and those smaller districts won't be able to make it. I also want to say, I'm always looking for information about what's going on in the area education agencies. Because I think we have not even begun to see the impact of what they did to those. And if anyone remembers, Chuck Grassley, as a member of the Iowa legislature, kind of helped create the AEA system in the 70s. And who were the biggest beneficiaries besides disabled kids? Rural school districts. And so who are going to be the most hurt by what they've done to the AEAs? Rural school districts. And so it's kind of hard to find information on that. So, but if people are aware of the services that aren't getting provided, I mean, that's going to be a huge problem. And this is only the second year of that bill being in effect. And so we're just going to see more and more funds being siphoned away from the AEA system.
Hi, I'm Deborah. Thank you for all the work that you do. It's genuinely appreciated and helpful. I would like you to please go back to the Senate primary and talk a bit more about those three candidates and what your observations are. And then if you have any insight into any anticipated Democrat retirements before 2026 or any recommended retirements.
Do you mean in the legislature? I do. Okay, so let me start with the Senate primary. So Nathan Sage got in early, which was smart. So, he was the only declared candidate at the time that Joni Ernst broke the internet of the world with that town hall. And who remembers that town hall was at 7:30 in the morning.
Yeah.
And Nathan Sage, I love the hustle. He drove from Knoxville all the way up to, was it in Parkersburg? That to be at a 7:30 in the morning, that you couldn't really anticipate that anything newsworthy was going to come out of that town hall, but it did. And he was there and he was on social media right away. And so he generated, for a first-time candidate who most people hadn't heard of, he's really raised a lot of money. I do think it's the challenging thing for Nathan Sage is if you haven't been active in Democratic politics and you're running against people who have been running and winning in multiple election cycles, that's just a difficult position to be in. So I think that's the biggest challenge for him. But if you've seen him speak, he is an engaging speaker. He speaks in a very different way. It's challenging for me. I have a weekly radio show on KHOI Community Radio in Ames, and it's like an ongoing challenge. Can I cover Nathan Sage without jeopardizing KHOI's broadcast license? Because it's hard to find a soundbite where he doesn't sometimes throw in some profanity. But he's a Marine veteran and he talks like a Marine veteran and he doesn't talk like an experienced politician. And I think that people do find that refreshing. I see him as the underdog in the primary though, just for that fact that he doesn't have the experience running campaigns and he doesn't have the relationships that the other candidates do. So Zach Walz and Josh Turek, I don't know that they're that different on many of the issues. And in terms of what they voted for in the state legislature, I haven't perceived them to be very different on any of the issues. Zach Walz is kind of positioning himself as more of a pro-labor candidate and has more labor union endorsements. But Josh Turek has said every time I've seen him lately, he said, I have 100% pro-labor voting record in the primary. And so, I think he's very anxious not to cede that ground. I think that it just kind of depends on, they're both very well spoken. It kind of depends on what you are looking for in a candidate. I feel like the Josh Turek's kind of biggest selling point is that he's won twice in a district Trump carried, which is there weren't very many state legislators who were able to win in districts Trump carried. He outperformed the Kamala Harris by quite a bit. Zach Walz is in a safe Democratic seat, so it's kind of it's just a different situation. He's actually never had a Republican opponent. So I think that that's going to be his challenge approaching the primary, is just going to be convincing people that, that he can run against a Republican opponent. And he has a really good story about Ashley Hinson that relates to when they were both in the legislature in 2019 and some of the work he did on the mobile homes manufactured housing issue, where he was able to help get a bipartisan bill through the Iowa Senate. And then Ashley Hinson was one of the key people who killed it over in the Iowa House. working for the benefit of the interest groups in the mobile home industry. So in any case, I mean, I think that the Senate race is going to be more difficult for Democrats than the governor's race, because we've seen around the country that voters view governor's races a little bit differently from federal elections. And we've seen Annie Beshear in Kentucky, John Bel Edwards in Louisiana, Laura Kelly in Kansas. We've seen Democrats win recently governor's races in red states. And before that, Steve Bullock in Montana. But what we haven't seen recently is non-incumbent Democrats winning Senate races in red states. And so I feel like that's going to be a really big challenge. And for the Democrat, whoever the nominee is, to pull off the Senate race, it would have to be kind of a 1974 kind of a year for Democrats nationally, which it's just the numbers are very daunting. And I think that Ashley Hinson is just, you know, as a former TV journalist, she doesn't make that many mistakes. I mean, it's not that you couldn't criticize anything in her record, but it's just like, she's not likely to make the same mistakes that a candidate who's less adept, like Randy Feenstra, is going to make a lot of mistakes. I'm sorry to pick on Randy Feenstra, but it's just, I mean, I can look at a Republican candidate and say like, wow, you know, he's like really doing a good job running a good campaign, or that was a really effective speech. So it's not just like whether he's personally appealing, it's just that he's not a very talented candidate. So the Senate race, I think it's still one Democrats nationally will invest in, because there just aren't that many Senate races that are up for grabs, and it is an open seat, but I just feel like the Senate race is a real uphill battle.
Hi. Talk to us about the environment as a campaign issue. Are you seeing any increased concern outside of Polk County? Is that a winning issue for a candidate to talk about?
Well, I don't know if it's a winning issue. It's interesting, because when I've done events around the state, I mean, both my own events that I've spoken at, and then when I've attended like either the Rob Sand Town Hall or Julie Stouch's meetings, I mean, water quality is always way at the top. People always ask about water quality. And Julie Stouch, she wrote something for my website that after her first round of meetings around the state, it was one of the top issues: public education and water quality. And so I think that is what is animating Chris Jones to think about running for Secretary of Agriculture, that, you know, so Democrats in general, Iowa Democrats have not made that issue a focal point, and he thinks they should. And so he would like to make, if he runs for Secretary of Agriculture, he would basically like to make that race a referendum on, are you happy? Do you think Iowa's doing well with the environment and water and soil? And if so, you should vote for the incumbent. But if you don't think we're doing well, you should vote for me. There are individual Democratic legislators who have championed that issue and put it also in the context of Iowa's rising cancer rate. And I think that there even are like rank and file Republicans who are interested in water quality, but I have seen no interest from Republican politicians. I mean, I just don't hear about it. I don't see them introducing bills on it. I don't see at their candidate forums, it just doesn't seem to be like something that comes up. I mean, like the carbon pipeline, where in addition to all of the other issues with it, it would be a huge, that there would massively increase the water consumption to have all of those carbon capture facilities. And ethanol plants already are huge users of water. That is something that people don't talk about. And it's like all of the focus has been on eminent domain and private property rights, which I'm sympathetic to the property owners who don't want the pipeline going through. But I feel like for the state as a whole, the impact on water would be much more significant, and yet no one is talking about it. Because in a Republican context, the politician, you know, there's just, that would not be a winning issue on their side of the aisle for sure. The winning issue is the private property. So, and you know, when I listen to the debates about eminent domain, like I said, I am sympathetic to the private property owners, but you know, when it's like when they talk about how fundamental and you know, the worst intrusion, and it's like, you took away my right to control my own body. So, you know, I'm sorry that the pipeline is going through somebody's farm. I mean, I don't want to minimize that. Yeah, I would be upset if somebody put a pipeline through land that I own, but it's always kind of jarring to me. Like that is like when they're talking about fundamental rights, that's what they're talking about. So, but the water quality, I mean, I do believe that Democrats probably should talk about it more. I don't know, you know, I don't know why, you know, it hasn't risen to the top. I think that the perception among Democratic candidates is that it's not a voting issue for many people. Like the people for whom it's a big priority would already be voting for Democrats anyway. So I think that that's why it's not necessarily a big, but I think that people are worried about it. I think that the cancer rate, there is much more awareness now of Iowa's cancer rate than there used to be even a couple of years ago. And I think that people are starting to figure out, you know, we don't know all the causes. There are multiple causes, but it can't just be like, let's say, binge drinking. Right. Because why is our cancer rate so much higher than Wisconsin? Right. It can't be, we don't have, right? We don't have a higher smoking rate than many other states. You know, we don't have so, I mean, there are a lot of factors that are playing into it, but I think more and more people are thinking that we're exposed to so many chemicals and nitrates here, and that we should be taking some of these issues more seriously.
Yeah, I'm gonna mention the candidate just for your reference. Spencer Wall is running for the second time in Warren County, whatever that district is. Historically, that district elected a number of Democrats. And Spencer is running for the second time. His predecessor was a Democrat who was beaten. What the hell?
Okay.
How do those kind of counties regain a blue case?
I'm gonna get to that, but I realized I didn't answer the question about Democratic retirements. There are a number of Democratic legislators who have already announced their retirement, including a few seats. State Isaiah Knox is running for the Polk County Supervisor. Ruth Ann Gaines is not running for re-election. Over in Davenport, Monica Kurth is not running for re-election. So I do think there will be quite a few open Democratic seats, and I support having competitive primaries and all of those. Okay, so this is like, I could just spend the whole rest of the time talking about counties like Warren County. So I have a low-key obsession with what I call the mid-sized cities, what some people call micropolitan areas. These are the counties with towns with populations between about 10,000 and 30,000. And many of them were Democratic strongholds for generations, like generations even before my birth. I'm talking about places like Fort Dodge, Newton, Ottumwa, Burlington, Keokuk, Clinton, Mason City. And these places are all now represented by Republicans in the legislature. Indianola was, I mean, the Warren County, I think, has always been a little more swingy, but Warren County certainly voted for a lot of Democrats, always voted for Tom Harkin, voted for Tom Vilsack. And we see all of these mid-sized counties. And I believe that that is the biggest problem that Democrats have running in the statewide races now, is what's happened in these mid-sized counties. Because if you look at, let's say, the 2018 governor's race, which Fred Hubble did not lose by that much, the rural vote is certainly a problem for Democrats. But if he had just even had like the Chet Culver margin in places like Mason City and Burlington and Fort Dodge, and it's to the point now where, like, Democrats this last cycle, we didn't even field candidates for the House and Senate seats at Fort Dodge. That is absurd. If you took a time machine back and said, like in 1975, like, hey, Democrats don't control the Iowa legislative seats in Fort Dodge, they would think that you were out of your mind. And the seat, and again, I don't want to take anything away from Mike Zimmer and what he accomplished flipping that seat in Clinton County in January, because that was a really tremendous win. But if I went back even 15 or 20 years and I said, there's an Iowa Senate seat, it includes all Clinton County, Maquoketa in Jackson County, and then a little bit of northern Scott County, you would say that's a safe blue seat. And now it's a seat that Donald Trump carried by 21 points. So now it's like a huge Democratic, victory to win in a district like that. And so somehow for Democrats to become competitive and have any chance of having legislative majorities or even breaking the supermajority, I mean, the biggest task is turning things around in these mid-sized cities. And so Warren County would be one, and like, I don't really know, I don't know exactly why. I don't think that Warren County is any different from lots of other counties and including counties in other states that are similar. These are communities, I mean, the Iron Range in Minnesota is another area that was like a Democratic stronghold for many years and is marched more and more toward Republicans. And it's not just Donald Trump, because we already saw this happening in Bruce Braley's race against Joni Ernst. He didn't do as well. I can't remember how many of those counties he carried, but he didn't do as well as Democrats did historically. So this is something that's been brewing for a while. And I think it is important for Democrats to have strong candidates in all of those races, but that, things have to turn around when you're not competitive in a place like Ottumwa, which was like when Bonnie Campbell ran for governor in 1994, she carried 4 counties and one of them was Wapello, where Ottumwa is, because that's how Democratic it was.
Yep.
So, Ottumwa, Wapello County voted for JFK when like 95 or 94 Iowa counties voted for Richard Nixon. So, so things have really changed a lot. And I've done a couple of events in Ottumwa, and it's like Democrats are a little bit shell-shocked in communities like that because it feels like it all happened very fast.
Yeah, Bryce Oakley. You're a member of the Writers Collaborative. Oh, by the way, I was a survivor of that 1974. That was when I was a Republican.
Right.
But that's another story. I became a Democrat in 08. My question to you, though, you're a member of the Writers Collaborative, which is doing so much to bring good journalism to all of us. And if you're not familiar with it, you should be. But my question is one of the great challenges that I know you have championed is transparency or the lack of it in state government. Can you give us a report card on local and state and perhaps our congressional elected officials on what you're seeing on transparency in government?
Well, I think most people would agree, including people who have been at this a lot longer than I have, Randy Evans and Kathy Abradovich, that state government is in the least transparent place it's been in 50 years, probably. And I was part of a lawsuit. The ACLU sued the governor's office on behalf of me, Clark Kaufman of the Iowa Capitol Dispatch, and Randy Evans of the Iowa Freedom of Information Council. And we were able to get a good Iowa Supreme Court ruling, and the lawsuit was eventually settled. But the governor's office now will at least respond to records requests, but state government in general, I mean, they really drag their feet. It takes forever to get answers. They withhold, they're very aggressive about using the exemptions in the open records law. I had a very frustrating situation last year where I was trying to get information about how often State Treasurer Robbie Smith works in his Des Moines office. And I was trying to get key card data because they all have to swipe into the building. And I couldn't get key card data. They were claiming that it fell under this exemption for security. And I was like, I'm not threatening anyone's security. And I'm not asking even for the time of day. I'm only asking for like the dates that he swiped in. Well, anyway, so this was last year. I was fighting this battle for months. And then this year they added a new exemption to the open records law. So now all key card data for all state employees is considered confidential. And they just threw in for good measure, which I hadn't even requested, all security camera footage in the Capitol, which is a huge problem. I mean, there are big protests, there are public events happening there. If some incident happens, you aren't going to be able, the media will not be able to get that information. And, I have less access, a lot of my peers in the Iowa Capitol Press Association have more access than I do, but like I had to fight for 5 years to even be seated on the press bench in the Iowa House. And I had to file a lawsuit. The Institute for Free Speech represented me in a lawsuit against the Iowa House chief clerk on that. And Chuck Grassley does these weekly conference calls. And I can never get on those calls even to listen, let alone ask a question. I can't get copies of the recordings of the calls afterwards. I can't get into Ashley Hinson's weekly calls that she does with the press. And, you know, that's for my reporting. Even if I couldn't ask a question, it would actually be helpful for me to hear what other people are asking and how they're answering. And not just the snippets that might end up in the newspaper article, but for me, I would want to hear the whole thing. And like, I don't even know, is anyone asking the follow-up questions that they should be asking? I have no idea. So that's a continuing frustration. I mean, Marionette Miller Meeks had a conference. She doesn't often have a call with reporters, but like she did this last week. Of course, you know, I wasn't told about it and didn't have any idea it was happening. Zach Nunn and Randy Feenstra, they're not very accessible to the press generally. So I think like most people are in kind of the same boat in that. But it's challenging. I mean, the governor's office, they allow me into her press briefings, but they still, you know, they sometimes will have a special invitation only thing. Like last year, when she does an annual thing with a budget where her staff answer people's questions about her budget, like I'm not invited to that. I wasn't invited to Secretary of State Paul Tate's little press conference that he did to answer questions after they certified the 2024 elections. And it's just, you know, I mean, no one can stop me from writing what I want to write, but it certainly is an impediment to my news gathering when I'm not able to be present to even hear what people are asking. So that is, I would say, you know, on transparency, I would give it a very low mark. You know, the legislative website, from what I can tell, is there's a lot more information there than some states have on their legislative websites. But like you can watch the subcommittee meetings online, but nobody's archiving those. So if you miss it live, you just missed it. And the committee meetings on the Senate side, they do record those and have the video, but on the House side, and then they always have multiple meetings at the same time that you want to see. So like in Minnesota, you can go and all the subcommittee meetings are recorded and archived. So if you miss it, you could watch it later. So that's always one of my challenging things during the legislative session is trying to plan out my day and figure out which subcommittees I can go to. And can I maybe trade audio with someone where I give them the thing that I heard? Because you just miss it. So I would say the transparency is pretty lacking. Okay.
This is back to Northwest Iowa. Just anecdote, we have family in Lamar, Spencer, in areas where it was hard to admit you're Democrat not very long ago. They're hearing a lot turn the other way because of the very low morale in the schools. Our daughter's the area education agency social worker out there. So she's hearing a lot from all kinds of school employees, but all kinds of other folks too, the turnout for Democratic things. So I wondered how might that affect the governor's race particularly. They've seen lots of positive support for the Democrats in places that they haven't in the past.
I think that if you've been to a Rob Sand town hall and he's talking about public education extensively, and that's why. And he's getting pretty good turnout, including in counties in that part of the state. And after the Sioux City Senate District 1 special election in August, which Caitlin Dre won with like a 20-point overperformance compared to how Kamala Harris did, Woodbury County Supervisor Mark Nelson recorded this like epic rant on Facebook. I recorded it right away because I thought he's going to delete that thing, and he never did. And I think he said his dad is on a school board, one of those smaller school districts. And he was talking about how this is all on Republicans. The policy coming out of Des Moines has been terrible. It's terrible for schools. They can't do anything. And I mean, I think it is real. I think that the schools, I think some of the impacts haven't been felt yet, but I do think that there will be a swing. Will it be a big enough swing to win the governor's race or any of these other statewide races? I don't know, but certainly compared to, you know, what happened in 2022, there's definitely going to be a big swing. Because I believe that, I haven't been lately in Spencer or Lamar's, but I do think that there's a lot of people are very unhappy. And whatever happens on property taxes, you know, if it makes it more and more difficult for the city and counties to provide the services that people want, I mean, there's just no easy answer for that. Is there? We're done.
Yeah,
So I said to Pete Heard, who's part flavor, like, how does she remember all of that stuff? I can remember little bits and pieces and like discounting in this bit, but like, just amazing. And so we are so grateful for you. Thanks for being here. And we're probably like, if we do, and the best of your ability, making sure that we have all the information that we need, particularly in state government, but all of the areas. So thank you. Thank you to all of you for being here, whether you're in person or online. Crossroads is monthly. So our next Crossroads is the third Friday of January. Hope you will return. We're going to be talking about atheism. Jason Benell, who is the president of Atheists and Free Thinkers, will be with us to talk about that and his perspective of how that impacts separation of church and state, religion and government, those kind of topics. So hope you will return in January and have a great holiday season. Thank you.